Investigation about the footage of their player Raheem Sterling appearing to take a legal high. Manager Brendan Rodgers will deal with the matter informally. It comes at a time when negotiations on a new multi-million-pound contract for the England forward have stalled. And that's all for now. More on Sports Day for you in the next hour. Hugh, back to you.
All right, thanks very much. We'll be back with you a little later on. So, with 23 days to go to May the 7th, and in a week of manifesto launches, we're asking you to send in questions for special guests. It's called Ask This. That's the hashtag. And already in recent days, we've put questions to Conservatives and to Labour politicians. Today, it's the turn of the Liberal Democrats, and I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Danny Alexander, who served as Chief Secretary to the Treasury in the coalition government. Nice to have you with us, Danny. Thanks very much for coming.
Thank you for having
me. Well, there's been a great response. Lots of questions have come in, and what we've tried to do is group them in terms of themes. Okay, So to everyone who sent questions in, thank you very much. They're really good, pointed questions. I'm going to start with Stuart Equia. I hope I'm pronouncing that properly, Stuart. Young people who grow up in Scotland get university fees for free. Where does that fit in with your idea of a fair society?
Well, it's a devolved environment in Scotland, and higher education is devolved to the Scottish Parliament, as is schools policy, health policy, local government. Quite a lot more will be devolved to the Scottish Parliament in terms of tax powers under the plans that we'll be setting out in our manifesto tomorrow. So that's a matter for the Scottish Parliament to decide for itself how it wants to approach those things. My colleagues in the Scottish Parliament support the current arrangements in Scotland, though they would point out, if someone in the Scottish Parliament was sitting here rather than me, that the SNP government in Edinburgh has cut back dramatically on college places in order to fund some of its other commitments, and that is denying educational opportunities to an awful lot of young people in Scotland. Obviously, we made a decision back in 2010 in terms of tuition fees. Nick Clegg has quite rightly apologised to people that we weren't able to keep the pledge that we had made. In a sense, with both Labour and the Conservatives wanting to put up fees, we were left with no option. But what we did do is, rather than standing in the sidelines, we got involved in the policy making, and I think as a result have also put in place a system in England and Wales which is encouraging more young people from disadvantaged backgrounds to go to university. You're now seeing record numbers of kids from those sorts of backgrounds going to university in England. You're seeing record numbers of young people going to university, and you're seeing a big expansion in apprenticeships. And so overall, the range of opportunities has been increased, albeit that politically that's been a very challenging thing for us as Lib Dems.
OK, so a student watching or a parent watching with an interest in this area will maybe look at Labour's manifesto with a pledge there to lower tuition fees from 9 to 6,000, and then we'll think, well, is that in my interest? Why would I vote Lib Dem if I've got this option available from Labour? And what would your answer be?
I'd say that I'd look at Labour's policies and promises and be pretty sceptical about all of them, because...
That's a pretty clear pledge, though.
Well, but the Labour plan is not properly set out in terms of how it's paid for. And so Labour haven't set out any of the measures they need to take to deal with the deficit, any of the cuts that they'd make, any of the taxes that they'd put in place. And so there is a big hole at the heart of Labour's economic plan which doesn't stack up. And so I think that's a reason to be extremely sceptical about that pledge. And in a sense, you'll see tomorrow when we publish our own manifesto, we have a strong priority around schools, around early years education, because we think when there's limited money to go around, that's where the priority should be in terms of trying to give everybody the best possible start in life.
I'm going to try and get through as many as I can.
I'll be briefer.
That was well picked up, thank you. Peter Hyams. Peter, thank you for the question. Would you join a coalition with the Conservatives again?
That's a matter for the British people. We've said that whichever party has the strongest mandate from the electorate, has the most number of seats, the strongest vote, that they should have the first chance to form a government. So we would talk first to whichever party was in that position. Of course, it would depend on whether we could, as Liberal Democrats, deliver our key policy commitments, and you'll see what they are when we unveil our manifesto tomorrow.
So you have senior colleagues like David Steele, for example, clearly not keen on that, but you think that they're wrong to be ruling anything out?
I think most Liberal Democrats actually want us to be in government if we're in a position to do so, and to use that to deliver Lib Dem policies, because in the end you go into politics, I believe, to try and change society, to make a difference. You know, we want Britain to be a society that offers opportunity for everyone. We can best achieve that in government delivering on our policies.
OK, we have a question on tape this time, and this is from Freya in Wiltshire. And Freya, thank you very much. This is her question.
What are your plans to ensure that everyone who needs mental health services on the NHS can have access to adequate mental health services, particularly youth mental health services, which have suffered dramatic cuts over the last few years, particularly due to the coalition?
Thanks, Freya. Lots of questions in this area because there's acute concern and people are very angry about some of the policies that have been implemented and really saying quite pointedly that if it wasn't for some of the cuts that you and your colleagues put in, some of these problems wouldn't be as big as they are. So what's your answer?
Well, it's a great question from Freya, and mental health is one of the things that Nick Clegg and the Liberal Democrats have prioritised in government and will prioritise in our manifesto. Just a few weeks back in the budget, we announced significant additional funding precisely to address the point that Freya is raising, to put in place access standards.
It was a bit late in the day,
well,
people are thinking.
The NHS is, you know, a lot of the structures that evolve within the NHS, so local decision makers make decisions about priorities in an individual area. We've taken the view that mental health for too long has been a kind of second-class citizen within the health service. It hasn't had strong targets, for example, to say these are the sorts of treatment standards that people can expect. We're bringing those in for children and adolescents. We're going to join up better between job centres and mental health services to try and make sure that people who need support with mental illness to get back into work get that much more quickly than they do at the moment. This is going to be one of the main things for the Lib Dems in our manifesto tomorrow.
OK, well, we'll look out for that. Yusuf Osman, Yusuf, thanks for this. What would Lib Dems do to support people with disabilities and reverse the trend to punish them? There were lots of questions about bedroom tax, there were lots of questions about welfare, really making vulnerable people suffer. And I'm just wondering, would you acknowledge now at this stage that maybe you underestimated the impact of some of the policies you implemented on vulnerable people?
Well, first off, on the spare room subsidy, on the bedroom tax, we've said that we don't think that was implemented properly, that we think it's right to say that the amount of housing benefit you get should be dependent on the number of rooms you need. But one of the things we're saying in our manifesto is that we don't think that anyone should have that applied to them until they've been offered appropriate alternative accommodation, and that disabled people who need an extra room because of their disability should be exempt from that policy as well. So I would acknowledge that wasn't implemented in the best way. We should do it differently, and that's what we'll be putting in place tomorrow. I'd also say that a lot of our policies about how do you get people off benefit and into work that we'll be talking about again tomorrow. I mentioned one on mental health where, you know, trying to have better joined up between mental health services and employment. It's about trying to make it easier for disabled people and better support for disabled people to get off benefit and into work. After all, most disabled people would want to work. There just often isn't the support there that there should be to help them do so.
If you knew that there were these serious flaws in the bedroom tax, spare room subsidy thing, you've been very quick to tell us as Lib Dems, we've had a good effect on this government, we've stopped this and we've encouraged that. Why didn't you take action in that area?
Well, we've been looking at the internal evaluations within government. We put in place this policy, we've looked at the evaluations, we've looked at how it's actually been done in practice by the Department for Work and Pensions, and we've taken a view that we do it differently. That's the way we've done it. I think it's perfectly sensible for us to say, here's a policy which we don't think has been implemented in quite the right way, and that's something that we're going to change. There's a few, not many, but there's a few policies in the current government that we're saying that about, like the Shares for Rights scheme, which we'd abolish and use that money to help pay for some of our other commitments on the National Health Service. We would reverse the tax break for married couples, the tax penalty for unmarried couples, if you like, in order to help fund some of the policies we're putting forward tomorrow. So there's a few things like that. Okay. But look, by and large, I'm immensely proud of what we've done in government, not least turning the economy around, and I stand by the decisions that we've made, and where we think we should make a change, we'll spell it out.
Adam Evely, Adam has this question for you, Danny. Exactly what cuts are you going to make to fund the drop in tax and massive increase in NHS spending that you're proposing? Again, this goes back to a theme really that we've had today again with Michael Gove earlier, which is, you know, asking politicians, to what extent can you ask people for votes if you're not being absolutely precise and transparent about, you know, your proposals, giving ballpark figures and then actually not providing detail about how that'll be achieved?
Well, I agree with that criticism, and that's why on Sunday, Nick Clegg, David Laws and myself set out how the Lib Dem manifesto would be funded, not just on a policy-by-policy basis, which is what the other parties have been doing, but also setting out how we'd go about balancing the books and doing so fairly. So we set out a whole range of tax increases, for example, a new corporation tax charge on the banks, better aligning the taxation of dividends with income tax, an extra tax on high-value properties. I mean, there's a long list. I can go on for as long as you would like. We've also set out some savings that we'd make in the welfare system, for example, capping the uprating of benefits to 1% for another 2 years, no longer paying winter fuel payments and some other benefits to pensioners who pay tax at the higher rate. It's a fair reform, but a difficult one. And within departmental spending, the lion's share would come from the programme of efficiency reforms that we set out in government. So you'll remember last autumn we set out a plan to save £10 billion over the next 3 years in terms of continuing the programme of cutting the running costs of government, implementing new technology to save money and so on. So that would be the lion's share of the departmental savings, but obviously we'd have a spending round to identify specifically where everything would fall.
I think we've got time for one more, Danny, if you can, and that is from Tall Paul, who sent us this. Paul, thanks very much. What's your biggest disappointment? I think he means in coalition government. I don't think he means globally. What's your you've mentioned, that there are some areas of policy that you regret not having changed or that they worked out in a different way. What was the biggest disappointment for you as a Lib Dem in government? Was it the tuition fees thing or was it something else?
Well, the tuition fees thing has been really difficult. It's a difficult issue. It's something that we've said very clearly that we regret. I'd say actually for me, the thing that frustrates me most is that we have worked very, very hard to get an economic recovery. We've worked very hard to create jobs in this country, to cut taxes for working people. And it frustrates me to see the Tories trying to take all the credit for these Lib Dem achievements. And part of our battle in the election campaign is to show that we've only had a balanced plan to deal with the economy because Lib Dems are in government. You can see today, the more extreme offering that the Tories are setting out, with cuts way beyond what is necessary, with no measures to ask more from the wealthiest. And you can see actually how the Liberal Democrats have shaped, in many ways, the economic plan in this Parliament. And the only way to stick to that plan and stop the Tories lurching to the right, or indeed Labour lurching to the left, is to make sure that you've got Liberal Democrats with a tight grip on the reins of power in the next Parliament too.
We shall see. Danny, thank you very much for coming in. Danny Alexander there for us for the Lib Dems, Chief Secretaries of the Treasury, answering your questions. And by the way, there were lots of great questions. I hope I kind of grouped them in a way which made sense there. But really, many thanks for those of you who sent in lots of questions during the afternoon.